The sun burned gently over the Gulf Coast, casting golden flecks across the waves like a painter's brush on water. It was the kind of day people dreamed about in brochures: crystal blue skies, the scent of coconut sunscreen, and children's laughter mingling with the rhythm of the tide. The Horizon Bay Resort buzzed with life, a paradise carved into the Florida shoreline where time seemed to slow and worries melted under the sun. Rachel Harper stood at the edge of the boardwalk, holding her daughter Emily's tiny hand. They had arrived only the day before, 2 small suitcases and a promise of rest tucked into the back seat of a rented SUV. Rachel had needed this. Life in Atlanta had become heavy with court hearings, workplace pressures, and the suffocating loneliness that had lingered since her divorce. Emily, just 6 years old, carried none of that weight. Her eyes were wide and bright as she scanned the beach for seashells, her curls bouncing with each excited step. "Can we get ice cream now, Mommy?" Emily asked, tugging gently at Rachel's arm. Rachel smiled and knelt beside her. "You didn't forget, huh? You promised after we unpacked." With a soft laugh, Rachel nodded. "All right, but only if you promise not to eat it too fast this time." Emily grinned, the gap in her front teeth peeking through. "Deal." They made their way toward the little snack hut by the Lifeguard station, where colorful umbrellas fluttered in the breeze and a radio played a summer pop tune. It was busy, but not overwhelming. A lifeguard named Mark nodded as they passed, giving Rachel a polite smile. Emily waved to him and he waved back absently before returning to his binoculars. Nothing unusual, nothing at all. Minutes later, Rachel and Emily vanished. It was as if the ocean swallowed them whole, though not a single witness recalled seeing them enter the water. No one saw them walk toward the road, and no camera captured their departure. Their half-eaten cones were found on a bench nearby, beginning to melt in the afternoon heat. Rachel's sandals sat just beside the boardwalk rail. Her phone remained in her beach bag beneath their umbrella, untouched. Panic did not come immediately. At first it was confusion. Maybe they'd gone for a walk. Maybe Emily needed the restroom. Perhaps they were at the gift shop. But as the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched across the sand, confusion turned to worry and then to dread. Hotel staff began searching around 5 o'clock. By 6, the local police had been called. Mark, the lifeguard, retraced his steps, scanning the water, the dunes, even the nearby pier. Dogs were brought in, drones lifted into the dusky sky. Every guest was questioned, every hallway and storage shed unlocked. Nothing. Rachel Harper and her daughter Emily had disappeared as suddenly as a falling star. Their names hit the local news that night, and the story quickly spread. A young mother and her daughter gone without a trace at a family resort. It was every parent's worst nightmare. Photos of Rachel, mid-30s, auburn hair, gentle smile, and Emily, with her sparkly purple backpack and mismatched socks, filled television screens and social media feeds. Rachel's parents, devastated and frantic, flew in from Charlotte the next morning. Rachel's ex-husband was cleared quickly. He'd been at a conference in Seattle, with witnesses and time-stamped receipts to prove it. There was no note, no sign of struggle, no ransom call, only silence. The last known sighting came from a tourist who swore she saw the pair walking toward the Lifeguard Tower just after 2 p.m. Emily was skipping, holding something in her hand. Maybe a shell, maybe a toy. The woman couldn't say for sure. That detail, small, almost meaningless, haunted the case for years. As days turned to weeks and then to months, the leads dried up. Authorities explored every possible angle: abduction, accidental drowning, even voluntary disappearance. None of it added up. Rachel had no criminal record, no hint of mental illness, no reason to run. She had just begun settling into a new life post-divorce. Emily was enrolled in a new school for the fall. Their luggage remained in their room untouched, their passports in the drawer. Rachel's journal, left on the nightstand, ended mid-sentence. The case went cold. Memorials were held. A bench with their names was installed near the snack hut. For 5 years, the resort moved on, repainted, rebranded, hired new staff, and welcomed new families. But for those who remembered, the air still felt a little heavier near that bench. Because sometimes paradise keeps its secrets buried deep beneath the tide, and sometimes they come back when you least expect. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. There's a lot more to this story, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. By the following morning, Horizon Bay Resort had transformed from a sanctuary into a hub of chaos. Yellow police tape fluttered in the ocean breeze. Guests whispered in huddles, some packing bags early, others clinging to their children as if something might reach out from the waves and take them too. Search crews combed the dunes while divers scanned the waters for any sign, any trace of Rachel and Emily Harper. But the beach gave nothing back. Lifeguards reviewed hours of surveillance footage from nearby buildings, searching for the smallest anomaly. Detectives interviewed guests, staff, even local vendors who worked the shoreline. They learned that Rachel had seemed relaxed, if tired, polite, reserved. She wasn't one for small talk, but she always smiled when Emily tugged her arm and asked another endless question. Rachel didn't look like someone running, the hotel manager told police. She looked like someone trying to breathe again. Rachel Harper's life had never been easy. At 16, she lost her older brother Caleb in a hiking accident in the Rockies. His body was never found. That grief followed her, settling deep. Still, she managed to build a life, graduated college, married young, had Emily. But the marriage crumbled under the weight of resentment and control. Her ex-husband Thomas had fought her for custody in courtrooms filled with tension and whispers. Friends said Rachel had grown more guarded, more anxious in the final months before the trip. She'd won temporary custody. The Florida vacation had been her reward to Emily for enduring the long hearings. A new beginning. A breath of fresh air. But now, with Rachel and Emily missing, suspicion crept into the investigation like a fog. Was Rachel running from something? Authorities explored every angle. Her credit cards hadn't been used since the morning of the disappearance. Her car remained in the hotel parking lot untouched. Her social media accounts were silent. Her phone, found with full battery and no suspicious messages, gave up no secrets. And Emily's tablet, her most cherished item, was in the room, under her pillow, untouched. Emily Harper had always been the light in Rachel's world, a precocious little girl who loved mermaids, jelly beans, and bedtime stories. She collected shells and believed each one held a secret. At school, her teachers said she was shy but fiercely creative. She wrote stories about ocean kingdoms and hidden caves, always with a brave little girl who outwitted monsters and found treasure. When Rachel spoke of her daughter, she lit up. "She's everything," she once told her friend Allison weeks before the trip. "She saved me. I want to give her a life I never had." The question that haunted the investigation was simple. If Rachel wanted to vanish, why take nothing with her? No money, no clothes, no documents, nothing to suggest planning, no indication she expected not to come back. A more sinister theory emerged: abduction. But that made even less sense. No witnesses, no struggle, no suspicious vehicles, no screams. It was like a magician's trick. Now you see them, now you don't. FBI agents arrived by day 3. The resort's remaining guests were asked to extend their stay or provide contact details in case of future questioning. Posters of Rachel and Emily were printed in bulk. Their photos aired on national news. Donations poured in for a reward. But as the days passed, hope thinned. Rachel's parents, Janet and Howard, were inconsolable. They refused to leave the resort, staying in Rachel's room, sleeping in shifts, waiting for the phone to ring. Every knock on the door felt like it might be news. It never was. "I know she wouldn't leave without saying goodbye," Janet insisted to reporters. "Not to us, not to Emily's friends, not to the world." But the world was silent. Then came a faint glimmer. A woman named Darlene, who ran a souvenir shop a mile up the shore, claimed she saw a woman and child matching their description that afternoon. The woman looked over her shoulder several times. The girl was quiet, holding a blue bucket. But Darlene wasn't sure, and her description, though compelling, wasn't conclusive. Surveillance cameras in her shop didn't catch them. And by the time authorities followed up, the trail was cold. 2 weeks passed, then a month. Searches expanded. Dive teams searched deeper waters. Cadaver dogs sniffed through the mangroves. Psychics sent in letters. None of it led anywhere. The beach bench bearing their names was installed quietly by the hotel staff. Guests left flowers there. A child once placed a stuffed dolphin at the base. No one knew who it belonged to. The story faded from headlines. But for some, the mystery never faded. Especially for those who worked the shore every summer, those who had seen Rachel's kind eyes and Emily's shell bucket, and remembered that something went wrong in paradise. Something still waiting beneath the surface. 5 years later, the sea hadn't changed. The waves still curled over the shore in perfect rhythm, like the beach was breathing. Children still laughed under striped umbrellas, and families still posed for sun-soaked selfies. Horizon Bay Resort had been renovated, rebranded, and reborn under a new name: Coral Pines Retreat. The paint was fresher, the staff younger, and the memory of Rachel and Emily Harper had been buried beneath layers of new seasons and smiling guests. But not everyone had forgotten. Jake Monroe arrived at the resort just before summer break. 28, tall, with sun-bleached hair and quiet eyes, he carried himself with the alert stillness of someone trained to watch more than speak. A former Coast Guard rescue diver, Jake had left the military 2 years earlier after a mission off the Carolinas ended in tragedy. He didn't talk about it. He didn't need to. The way he scanned the water told the story. Jake took the lifeguard job to slow down, to breathe, to put himself near something predictable: waves, tides, sunrises, things that didn't change. On his second week at Coral Pines, just after sunset, he saw her. A little girl alone crouched near the rocks at the far edge of the beach, her fingers sifting through sand like she was hunting for something special. She was barefoot, wearing a simple blue dress, her hair tangled from the wind. She didn't look lost. She looked like she belonged there. Jake blinked. The rocks were off limits after dusk. Tide levels could rise fast. He called out, "Hey, you okay over there?" No response. The girl didn't even look up. He stood, started toward her, but by the time he reached the shoreline, she was gone. Just gone. Jake scanned the area for 20 minutes. Nothing. He chalked it up to exhaustion. He'd pulled a long shift in the sun. Maybe she ducked behind a dune. Maybe she was a guest with a shortcut back to the resort. Still, the image stuck with him. The next day, he asked around. No one had seen a girl fitting that description. No lost child had been reported. Security footage at the boardwalk showed no child walking alone. It was as if she had never been there, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling. That girl wasn't a hallucination. He began to watch more closely during twilight, when the shadows grew longer and the light played tricks. A few days later, just after 8 p.m., he saw the same girl again, this time further up the beach, near the old lifeguard tower that was no longer in use. She stood beside a woman in the distance. They were just silhouettes against the fading sky. Jake moved quickly, weaving through tourists and paddleboards. When he reached the tower, they were gone. Again, no footprints, no voices, just wind and sand and the sharp taste of salt in the air. Jake didn't tell his co-workers. They'd already pegged him as the quiet type. Mentioning ghost sightings would only fuel the gossip. Instead, he went home and searched online. Missing children, disappearances near Coral Pines, unsolved cases. That's when he found it. The headline was dated 5 years prior. Mother and daughter vanish from Horizon Bay Resort without a trace. The names, Rachel and Emily Harper. He stared at the photos, heart kicking in his chest. Emily, that was her. It had to be. The same round face, the same wide eyes, the same blue dress. Jake read every article he could find. He learned about the investigation, the dead ends, the bench, the family's heartbreak. He learned about the ice cream, the sandals, the shells, the final sighting at 2 p.m., the sudden silence. He barely slept that night. The next day he walked the beach at dawn, retracing the places he'd seen the girl. He looked at the rocks where she'd crouched, at the base of the old lifeguard tower. He even sat on the memorial bench without meaning to, not realizing it was theirs until he saw the names etched into the wood. Rachel, Emily. Jake sat for a long time, watching the water shift and glisten under the morning sun. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he knew what he saw. There was something here. Something no one had noticed, something not finished. He didn't know what it meant yet, but the beach, the girl, the silence, they were all part of something deeper, and Jake Monroe had spent too long diving into darkness to ignore it now. Jake couldn't let it go. The girl's face kept flashing through his mind like a tide that wouldn't recede. There was something in her expression, calm but not quite free, like she was waiting for something or hiding. He returned to the resort's archive room, tucked behind the maintenance office, and asked to see any old materials from before the rebrand. The clerk, barely 20, shrugged and handed over a dusty plastic tub marked HBR 2019, Horizon Bay Resort. Jake sat cross-legged on the floor and sifted through it. Among the flyers, old pamphlets, and faded menus, he found a security briefing dated August 2019, just weeks after Rachel and Emily disappeared. It included a list of guest concerns, one of which stood out. Several guests have reported seeing a woman and child walking the shoreline at dusk. No guests matching that description are currently registered. Jake stared at the note. Someone had seen them before. He hadn't imagined it. He went back to the beach vendor stalls and spoke to anyone who might have been working there 5 years ago. Most were new hires, but one man, Luis, who sold kites and sunglasses, recognized Rachel's photo immediately. She was quiet, he said, pointing at her printed face. Kind. Gave my niece $5 for helping her find a lost towel. I remember her. Jake leaned in. Do you remember anything strange around that time? The day she vanished? Luis rubbed his chin. I remember the silence. That was the strangest part. Just gone. No sound. No one saw them go. It was like the beach swallowed them whole. Jake nodded. That's how it felt to him too. Later that evening he walked the beach again, stopping where the boardwalk met the sand. He sat on the bench bearing Rachel and Emily's names, reading the inscription over and over. Loved beyond measure, lost beyond reason. There were seashells stacked neatly on the ground nearby. He wasn't sure if they'd been placed by visitors or the tide. The breeze shifted. He looked up. There in the distance were two figures again, near the tide line, barely visible, but unmistakable. A woman and a girl. Jake rose slowly and stepped forward. They vanished before he moved 20 feet. Jake began mapping the sightings. He kept a small notebook, writing down the dates, times, and exact locations. A pattern started to form. Always at twilight, always between two specific points, the old Lifeguard tower and the rock outcrop past the jetty. He started staying after his shift, hiding in the dunes with binoculars. Twice more he saw them, always distant, always quiet. No footprints, no sounds, just shadows. One night he approached a security guard, Brandon, who had worked there the summer of the disappearance. Brandon was reluctant at first, but Jake pressed gently. You ever see anything off around the rocks? Brandon looked away, scratched his arm. There's stuff we don't talk about, not officially. Like what? After they disappeared, a few of us saw lights down by the rocks, not flashlights. Like reflections, but there's no glass there, no metal, nothing to reflect. Did you report it? Brandon laughed bitterly. What do you say? I saw a shimmer? They'd have fired me for being high. Jake thanked him and left with his thoughts churning. There was a presence around those rocks, something beyond logic but real enough to leave impressions. Impressions Jake couldn't ignore. He spent hours that week reviewing online threads and forums, looking for similar sightings. One thread, buried deep in a beach town folklore subreddit, caught his attention. A user named SaltTide71 wrote, Coral Pines used to be Horizon Bay. Ever hear the stories? A woman and her child walking the shore at dusk. Seen 'em myself. Always vanish near the jetty. Jake messaged the user. No reply. But the story was growing clearer. Someone or something kept returning. Then, on a cool Thursday evening, Jake saw her again, closer than ever before. Emily. She stood by the water's edge, no more than 50 feet away, holding something in her hand. A shell. He took a step forward. Her head turned, just slightly. She saw him, and then she was gone. No splash, no run, just empty sand. Jake stood frozen, heart pounding. The image burned into his mind. This wasn't just memory, this wasn't just grief echoing through the waves. Something, someone, was still here. And now, she'd looked back. The next morning, Jake arrived at the beach before sunrise. He didn't go to the lifeguard station. Instead, he headed straight toward the far edge of the resort, where the rocks gave way to wild scrub and the land curved sharply into a cliffside. Few guests ever wandered that far. Too uneven, too isolated. But Jake had seen enough to know that something was hiding beyond the curated paths and polished views. Halfway up the slope, he noticed a faint trail veering off from the main walking route. It wasn't part of the resort's maintained paths. The underbrush was thick, but not untouched. Someone had moved through here before. He followed it slowly, ducking under branches and stepping over gnarled roots, until the path opened onto a narrow shelf of land above the sea. From there he could see the rocks below, the same ones where he'd seen Emily. The tide was lower than usual, exposing jagged stones and a small inlet where water pooled into a shallow basin. There was something behind it, a darker shape, partially hidden, a cave. It was barely noticeable unless you knew to look. No signs, no ropes, nothing to suggest it existed at all. Jake's breath caught. It was dangerous down there. The tide could roll in within minutes, cutting off escape. But he made a mental note. Low tide gave him a window, maybe an hour, 2 at most. He didn't go down that day. Not yet. He needed to be sure. Back at the resort, Jake searched through maintenance logs. He found nothing about the cave, no records, no inspections, nothing official. He asked one of the older janitors about it. "Cave?" the man replied, frowning. "You mean the one past the jetty? That thing's a death trap. Tide fills it fast. No one's supposed to go near it." Jake nodded. "You ever been inside?" The man shook his head. "Once, years ago. Didn't go deep. Felt wrong. Like the air didn't belong to you, hard to explain." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to the ocean through the open window. The rhythmic crash of waves sounded different now, like a code he hadn't learned to crack. He remembered something Rachel's friend had written in an old interview, buried deep in an online article. "Rachel once told me about a place she dreamed of, a place where the world forgets you. I thought it was just metaphor. Now I don't know." Jake got up before dawn and returned to the trail. He timed the tide, waited until it had pulled far enough back to expose the basin again. Then he climbed carefully down to the shoreline. The rocks were slippery, but he moved with the ease of someone used to dangerous footing. The entrance to the cave loomed in front of him, tall enough to walk into, wide enough to suggest it went far beyond the visible dark. He turned on his flashlight and stepped inside. The cave was colder than expected. Damp. The smell of salt and something older hung in the air. The walls were smooth in places, as if water had carved them over centuries. He moved slowly, listening to every drop of water that echoed in the silence. 10 steps in, he found something strange. Shells, dozens of them, arranged in little piles along the sides of the cave. Not random. Stacked, sorted by size and shape. Some had tiny painted faces. One was tied with string. Children's hands had been here. He moved deeper. A narrow bend opened into a larger chamber, barely lit by the faint glow from outside. There against the wall was a blanket, a worn stuffed rabbit, a pair of small sandals, and on the far side of the chamber, taped to the stone with weather-worn duct tape, was a photograph, Rachel and Emily. Rachel's arm around her daughter, both smiling. It looked recent. Jake felt the air leave his lungs. They had been here, or maybe still were. He crouched beside the blanket, touched it. The fabric was dry. Not new, but not rotted. Used recently. He wasn't alone in the cave. A sound echoed from the narrow passage behind him, soft, almost like a breath. Jake turned quickly, shining his light, but saw nothing, just walls and shadows. Still, he didn't run. Instead, he whispered, "Emily." No answer. Only the steady drip of water. But something had shifted. The story wasn't just a cold case anymore. Rachel and Emily hadn't been stolen by the tide. They had hidden from something. And now, for the first time in 5 years, someone had found the trail they left behind. Jake didn't speak to anyone for the rest of the day. His mind was a tide of questions, memories, and the weight of what he'd seen in the cave. Rachel and Emily hadn't simply disappeared. They'd survived, hidden, left signs. But from what? And why? He knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed someone who understood the edges of this place better than anyone, someone who lived in the spaces tourists didn't see. Her name was Anna Castell. Locals called her Cliffside Anna. She lived in a weathered cottage beyond the dunes, built partly into the rock. She sold paintings to curious vacationers, landscapes, beach storms, strange abstract pieces that made people uncomfortable. Jake had seen her work once at the town market. One painting stuck with him, a woman standing in a dark inlet, her hand outstretched to a child whose face was turned away. He found her tending to a tangled vine by her porch, grey streaks in her long black hair, eyes as sharp as knives. "You're not here for art," she said before he spoke. "No," Jake replied. "I need to ask about the cave." She froze, then stood slowly. "Which cave?" "The one near the tide basin, behind the rocks." Anna's gaze darkened. "I haven't been there in years." "But you've been?" "Yes." Jake took a breath. "I think someone's been living there." She studied him. "A woman and a child." He nodded. Anna looked away toward the horizon. "I saw them once, at dusk. They walked past my cottage, quiet, like ghosts who hadn't figured out they'd died. But I knew they were real. The girl dropped a shell, I picked it up, still have it." Jake leaned forward. "Do you know why they'd hide?" Anna's lips tightened. "Some people are running from things. Others are waiting for the tide to return what was taken." "What does that mean?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and motioned for him to follow. Inside her cottage, the walls were covered in paintings. Stormy skies, roiling oceans, twisted trees, and always in the distance small figures. Always a woman and a child. Jake stopped in front of one canvas. It showed the cave, exactly as he remembered it. Inside, the child crouched beside a candle, while the woman stood at the mouth of the cave, blocking something from view. "You painted this," he whispered. Anna nodded. "I don't dream like other people. Sometimes I see things before they happen, sometimes after, sometimes in between." He turned to her. "You know something, don't you?" She sighed. "There's an old story here. Not just about the Harpers, about this land, this water. They say the sea has memory, that it holds pain the way the earth holds bones. And sometimes it gives you a place to hide if the world won't protect you." Jake frowned. "You think the ocean gave them shelter?" "No," she said softly. "I think the cave did." He didn't press her further. He knew when to stop. Outside, the wind had picked up. Clouds gathered like thoughts unspoken. That evening, Jake returned to the beach. He sat by the rocks, watching the tide retreat. Every instinct told him he was getting close to something deeper, but Anna's warning echoed in his mind. Not all who vanish want to be found. Still, he couldn't let go. There were answers in that cave, and maybe, if he was lucky, Rachel or Emily might still be near. He returned to the security office and requested older surveillance footage from the summer seasons. The tech rolled his eyes but let Jake browse the archives. Jake watched hours of beach recordings, eyes scanning for that flicker, a shape, a silhouette, anything. Then, finally, he saw them. Footage from 2 summers ago. Twilight. A girl and a woman walking the sand. Not near the resort, but further south, past the boundary fence. No timestamp, no report, no follow-up. They hadn't just appeared now. They'd been surfacing for years, just outside of reach. Jake downloaded the footage and returned to the cave the next morning. This time he brought a small recorder. He stood inside the chamber, staring at the worn blanket, the photo on the wall. Then he hit record. "My name is Jake Monroe," he began quietly. "If you're hearing this, I'm not here to harm you. I've seen you. I know you've survived. And if there's anything you want the world to know, if there's something you're waiting for, I'm listening." He left the recorder there and walked away. Whatever happened next would come on its own tide. 2 days passed. Jake returned to the cave each morning, each evening, watching the tide shift like a breathing giant. The recorder remained untouched. No footprints, no voices, no change. But on the third morning, something was different. The recorder was gone. In its place, tucked into a crack in the stone, was a folded piece of paper wrapped in plastic. Jake's hands trembled slightly as he pulled it free and unfolded it. There was no name, no date, just 6 words written in careful, blocky handwriting: "Stop. It's not safe for you." Jake stared at the note, the words echoing louder than any shout. It wasn't just a message, it was a warning, one that confirmed everything. Someone was there, someone who knew he was watching, and someone who didn't want to be found, but it was too late to walk away now. He waited until low tide and descended into the cave again, this time with more gear. A stronger flashlight, climbing rope, waterproof backpack, and water. He wasn't here to disturb, but to understand. He stepped past the entrance and turned deeper, past the chamber he'd found before. The air grew cooler, the light more unstable. The cave bent sharply, and he had to crouch, ducking under jagged stone. Then it opened into a second chamber, this one longer, narrower, the ceiling arched like a cathedral of shadow. Along the far wall, drawn in dark charcoal or soot, were markings, dozens of them. Not random scribbles, symbols, circles, spirals, intersecting lines. Some resembled constellations. Others looked like waves, teeth, eyes. At the center was a large shell drawn with such precision it seemed to ripple under the light. Jake stepped closer and realized something startling. These weren't just drawings. They matched the sketches Emily had made in her school notebooks, the ones published online years ago by her grandmother in a desperate plea for leads. Seashells with spiral centers. Symbols, she said, were mermaid maps. Jake touched the stone. The symbols were recent. The charcoal flaked under his fingers. Whoever had drawn these, Emily or Rachel, they had done it here, in this space, maybe to pass time, maybe as a language only they understood, a record of survival. Further into the chamber, he found signs of habitation, makeshift bedding woven from blankets and dry palm leaves. Empty food containers tucked discreetly in corners, water bottles, a small rusted pot, and a flashlight, old but functional, placed carefully atop a flat rock like a shrine. Someone was still living here, still coming back. Jake didn't take anything. He didn't move anything. He sat down on the cave floor, closed his eyes and listened. A drop of water, a gust of wind, his own breath. Then faintly, barely above silence, a sound. Footsteps. He opened his eyes, heart thundering, but no one appeared. He whispered again, "Emily, Rachel, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." No reply, no movement. Still, he waited. When the tide began to rise, he knew he had to leave or risk being trapped. He backed out slowly, careful not to disturb anything, and returned to the beach just as the water began to reclaim the rocks. Back at the resort, Jake considered his next move. The story was bigger than him now. It wasn't just a mystery, it was a living truth, a reality hidden behind time and silence. He returned to Anna that evening. "They left me a message," he said. "Told me to stop." Anna didn't seem surprised. "They're afraid," she said, "not just of being found, of what happens if they are." Jake sat beside her. But why? What could be worse than staying hidden for 5 years? Anna didn't answer immediately. She reached for a jar on the shelf behind her and pulled out a seashell, small, pink, perfect. "I found this the morning after I saw the girl," she said. Same kind she carried. It was by my porch, like a thank you or a goodbye. Jake turned the shell in his hand. "I think Rachel's been protecting her daughter from something," he murmured. "Not just legally. Something real." Anna met his eyes. "Then you'll need more than truth to help them. You'll need permission." He nodded. "That's what I'm trying to earn." That night, Jake didn't dream. But when he woke, There was sand on his windowsill, and the same 6 words scratched faintly onto a shell beside his bed. "Stop. It's not safe for you." Jake didn't tell anyone about the shell on his windowsill. Instead, he returned to the cave one final time. This time not to look, but to leave something behind. He placed a notebook inside the chamber, wrapped carefully in plastic, with one sentence written on the first page. "I believe you. I want to help." Then he left it open, anchored with a stone. He didn't return the next day, or the one after. He waited. On the 4th morning, he found the notebook gone. That afternoon, he walked into the resort office and asked to speak with management. The assistant manager, a cautious man named Elliot, met him in a small conference room. Jake placed a printed copy of the footage from 2 summers ago on the table. "I know this isn't part of your current operations," Jake said evenly, "but I think it's time someone takes this seriously again." Elliot frowned. Is this from our property? From when it was Horizon Bay? These 2 people?" "They're Rachel and Emily Harper. I've seen them. Recently." Elliot leaned back uneasy. "You're saying they're still here?" "I'm saying they never left. And I found proof. Clothing, food remnants, personal items. They've been living somewhere near the cliffs. I've already contacted the authorities. They'll be here tomorrow." Elliot's face went pale. "Why didn't you come to us sooner?" "Because I didn't know who to trust, and I wasn't sure if I was chasing ghosts or survivors." The manager didn't answer right away. Then, almost too softly, he said, "There's a reason we don't advertise the cave. There were rumors, stories, legal fears." Jake narrowed his eyes. "What kind of fears?" Elliot hesitated, then leaned forward. "We had a guest injury back in 2018. A child wandered into the cave. Tide rose. She was rescued, but she swore someone was inside, watching her. No one believed her." Jake felt a chill slide down his spine. "You think the Harpers were in there even then?" "I don't know," Elliot whispered. "But after that, we quietly blocked the path. The staff was told to keep quiet. We never connected it to the disappearance." Jake left the meeting with confirmation. This wasn't just mystery anymore. It was negligence, silence, fear. But now, the door was opening. When the authorities arrived the next day, 2 federal agents, a local detective, and a forensic technician, Jake led them to the cave. The tide was perfect. The chamber lay bare, empty again, but clean. No more bedding, no shell piles, no photo, as if it had been scrubbed in silence. But they found one thing. Near the back wall, tucked behind a stone, was a small USB drive sealed in plastic. The technician handed it to the agents. Jake stayed silent. Hours later, in a temporary mobile unit parked near the boardwalk, the agents watched the contents. A single audio file. Rachel Harper's voice. "My name is Rachel Harper. If you're hearing this, I'm not sure if I'm still alive, but my daughter is, and she deserves the truth." She explained it all. How she fled with Emily after losing faith in the court system. How her ex-husband, Thomas, had gained enough influence to petition for full custody, despite a history of emotional abuse. How Rachel feared for Emily's safety, not just physically, but emotionally. How she packed their bags and drove south with no destination, just the idea that the ocean would be the furthest place he'd look. They hadn't meant to disappear, only to rest. But then Emily found the cave. She called it our shell house, said it was a secret, a magic place. I didn't correct her. Because after a while it did feel like magic, safe, hidden, untouchable. Rachel described how they survived, bartering with beach vendors, finding work under fake names at small coastal stands, returning to the cave when things got dangerous. "I tried to leave clues," she said, "but every time someone got too close, I panicked. I'm sorry." I was just trying to keep her safe. Jake sat beside the agents, fists clenched, eyes fixed on the screen. The final words on the recording were simple. "If someone finds this, please don't make her a spectacle. Just let her be free." The room was silent when the file ended. Then one of the agents turned to Jake. "We need to find them now. Carefully. Quietly." Jake nodded. Because now the truth had a voice, and it was time for the world to finally hear it. The search was swift but discreet. The agents avoided public channels. No sirens, no press, no uniforms. Just careful movement, guided by Jake and a map of the places Rachel might have gone. Spots where she once worked, people she may have trusted. Trails long cold, but still marked by memory. Jake revisited Anna, who greeted him before he even knocked. "She knows," Anna said. "She's watching." "Will she come back?" Anna looked toward the cliffs. "Only if she believes it's safe." That afternoon, the team split in pairs and fanned across the inland roads. Jake went with Detective Reyes, a seasoned officer who moved with quiet urgency. They checked abandoned cabins, trailers off old forest routes, fishing sheds tucked along forgotten canals. Nothing. Until dusk. On a dirt road 30 miles from the coast, they found tire tracks curving toward a thicket of pine and sawgrass. Hidden within, nearly swallowed by overgrowth, stood a weathered cabin, small, untouched, but lived in. Smoke rose faintly from a chimney. Jake's pulse surged. They didn't approach as lawmen. No weapons drawn, no shouts, just slow, cautious steps as Jake moved ahead, hands visible. He stopped 3 yards from the door. "Rachel," he said softly. "It's Jake." From the beach. Silence. He waited. Then a creak. The door cracked open an inch. A woman's voice, tired, measured, asked, "Are you alone?" Jake nodded. "It's just me. I brought no one with guns, no cameras, no news vans. I just want to help." The door opened. Rachel Harper stood in the frame, thinner than her photos, but unmistakable. Her auburn hair now streaked with gray, her eyes cautious but clear. In her arms stood Emily, now 11, taller but still clutching a seashell in one hand. Jake felt something swell in his chest. Relief, grief, awe. "You found us," Rachel said. "No," he replied gently. "You let me." They sat together in the tiny cabin, the air thick with 5 years of silence. Rachel spoke first. "I didn't want to disappear," she said. "I just ran out of choices." Jake nodded. "I heard the recording. We know about Thomas." Rachel flinched at the name, then nodded slowly. "I thought the system would protect her. But when he filed for full custody, they didn't even read the reports. They called me unstable for moving too often, said I had no permanent address, but I had to keep her safe." "You did," Jake said softly. "You did." Emily watched them both quietly, her eyes darting between them. She didn't speak, but she didn't hide either. There was strength in her gaze, like her mother's. Rachel explained how they moved at night, used cash only, took odd jobs under aliases. The cave had been their sanctuary when things felt most dangerous, an anchor to the one place Emily had felt happy. The shell house. "We came back every summer," Rachel said, "even when we stayed inland. Emily, she believed the beach remembered her." "She was right," Jake said. "I saw her." "More than once." Rachel gave a faint smile. "I told her not to, but she said you weren't like the others." Jake nodded. "I'm not here to drag you back. I'm here to help you come forward, on your terms." Rachel's expression wavered. "And what happens now?" "The agents just want to confirm you're alive, to close the case. We can work on protecting your identity, and Emily's. There are lawyers who specialize in this, people who can help." Rachel's voice trembled. "Will they take her from me?" Jake shook his head. "Not with the evidence you've left. Not anymore." She reached for Emily's hand and held it tightly. "I was never trying to vanish," she whispered. "I was trying to be seen by the one person who mattered, and you found us." Jake stood and took a deep breath. "I'll go let them know you're safe. You don't have to come today, but when you're ready, we'll be waiting." Rachel nodded. "Thank you." As Jake stepped into the fading light, he looked back once more. Emily stood in the doorway, watching. She raised the shell in her hand, and this time she waved. The news never broke nationally. There were no sirens, no breaking headlines, no dramatic reunions broadcast live. Just a quiet statement from the authorities. Rachel and Emily Harper have been located, safe and well, At the family's request, no further details will be shared. The case was officially closed. But for those who knew the full story, Jake, Anna, the small team who had watched this unfold in silence, it wasn't just closure, it was a beginning. Rachel and Emily didn't return to Atlanta. With the help of legal aid arranged by Jake's contacts, Rachel secured protected status and moved with her daughter to a private location upstate. A new name, a new school, a new rhythm. One without caves, fear, or secrets. For the first time in years, they had a door they could lock from the inside without listening for footsteps. Rachel worked remotely as an editor, her skills sharpened by years of solitude and journals never meant to be read. Emily started attending art classes, where she painted waves in brilliant blues and silvers. She never spoke of the cave to her new friends, but she kept a shell in her pocket always. Jake stayed at Coral Pines for one final season. He still patrolled the beach, still watched the tides. But now he did it with a sense of peace. The ghost that had haunted this place had been flesh and blood all along, afraid, fierce, determined to protect something precious. One afternoon, Anna gave him a canvas, a new painting. It showed a shoreline under stormlight and two figures walking into the wind. But this time, a third figure watched from a distance, tall, unmoving, not intervening, just present. She said it was your part of the story, Anna told him. Jake didn't reply. He simply nodded and carried the painting home. As the season ended, he left Coral Pines behind. No fanfare, just a goodbye to the sea. Because some stories don't end in fireworks. They end in breath, in silence, in safety, finally returned. And for Rachel Harper, that was all she'd ever wanted. A year later, a letter arrived for Jake. The return address was a post office box. Inside, a single photograph, Rachel and Emily. In a field of tall grass, smiling. Emily held a paintbrush in one hand, and in the other, still the same pink seashell. No words, no date, just a second envelope, smaller, sealed. Inside, 6 new words. You didn't save us. You saw us. Jake read it once, smiled quietly, and tucked it away. Because that was the truth. He hadn't rescued them. He had witnessed them. And sometimes that's what it takes, to be truly seen, fully known, and left free. So now when tourists pass the old bench near the Coral Pines boardwalk, they still pause. They still read the names. They still wonder. But the ocean knows the truth. It kept the secret until someone looked long enough, and then it let go. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this powerful story. If you felt moved by Rachel and Emily's journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps us share more stories that matter. And if you're ready for another unforgettable mystery, click the video on your screen right now. We'll see you there.